Hi everybody, welcome back to Climate Change Calculated. Today part 6 about political power dynamics and the switch to renewable energy. My name is Gerald Schuler, and if you're interested, stay tuned. So the slides are available here at this link, so you can go there, and this contains also the links as references. So we already saw climate change leads to the shift of habitats of animals and plants, and thus new contacts between carriers of viruses, and thus to more pandemics and even food shortages. Climate change also leads to more droughts, flooding, storms, and sea level rise. And all that leads to unrest and wars, and thus even more food shortages and rising prices for everyday necessities through supply chain shortages. See also Climate Change Calculated number 3, which you can find also here in this link, which contains also the previous slides. So this becomes even more apparent in recent times with all the shortages, first from the corona pandemic and now from the Ukraine war. So this then leads to further destabilization of our already unstable countries, especially dictatorships, as we will see. Countries with large reserves of fossil energy can rely too much on its exploitation, which promotes dictatorial developments, because for this no highly developed service society is needed, for instance, like in Russia or Saudi Arabia. So for that, I found a few interesting indices where you can measure the separation of powers. So in a country, the separation of powers means that the power to create laws, which is the politics, then the power to enforce the laws, which is the police, and the interpretation of laws, which is the justice, should be done independent by separate entities to avoid abuse of the other powers. So I found this separation of powers index here in this link. So you can actually click on this link and see further details. I will just show here the results for brevity. So here is, they have the scale from 1 to 10, and higher means better in this case. And when you look for Russia in 2020, it had a score of 3. And as a comparison, the Czech Republic had a score of 10. So here, Russia already in 2020 had a very low score. Similarly and related, the judicial independence score. So we saw justice is one of the 3 powers. And I found this link here, which also give a score for the judicial independence. You can even see a development over time here, which I also found interesting to see if things getting worse or better. So Switzerland has a score of 135, and Russia has just 15 in 2021, decreasing from 40 in 2020, and thus becoming worse than the Democratic Republic of Congo. China in 2021 had just 3, decreasing from 29 in 2018. So here you can see the judicial independence is getting worse in both China and Russia. So then I found this global rule of law measure here in this link. And here you have many countries. So here you can see on this page 16 of this link that Russia is ranked just 80 out of 100 shown countries. So they looked at 100 countries and Russia was just 80. I've also found this democracy index, quite interesting, here in this link. And In this democracy index, Russia in 2021 ranked number 124 with a score of 3.24, and it declined from a score of 5.02 in 2006. And as a comparison, Norway in 2021 had the first rank with a score of 9.75. So here again, you can see a range up to 10. You can also take a look at this, at Russia's political system here in this Wikipedia link, where you can see a diagram. And this diagram doesn't show too much, but you can see in the figure that the president has the power over all institutions, and basically there is no separation of powers, and that basically makes abuse easy. Abuse by the president. Also interesting is are the main exports. So when you look at the country's main exports, which you see here in this link, you can see that the main export of Russia is crude oil, which needs relatively few people. So this industry basically is about drilling oil out of the ground, and then it's shipped abroad and sold. And this just needs the oil industry and not much else. This is quite different, for instance, for Spain, which has a similar size economy as Russia, even though it has many fewer people. So the main export of Spain is cars. And Spain has about the same total export value, but products like cars require a highly developed service-based society. So basically everybody has to contribute. So the society plays a much bigger role in such kind of economy. Yeah, so that leads me to the power dynamics of dictatorships. So dictators know that they don't have the majority of people supporting them, right? Hence, they have to use force and suppression to stay in power. Otherwise, they would have to go. Having no separation of power, politics, justice, and executive, enables this. So we have to have the possibility to abuse those powers. And this also enables corruption and disables the rule of law. And the force that the dictator applies then produces an opposite force. Of course, the people fight back. And this then leads to a cycle of ever increasing force in such a country. When then the limit of force is reached, the dictator seeks more power by trying to conquer other countries. So basically, his last resort is to try to conquer other countries to get more power. And this means also now breaking not just domestic law, but also international law. And in this way, he also creates a common enemy and distractions from problems internally. So it's also useful for the dictator. The suppression in dictatorships works better for uneducated people. So if the dictator can tell them things that are not true, though uneducated people believe it more easily. That is why in dictatorships, educational systems are run dry of money and higher education is actually discouraged. And then conquering another country is about submission of the people. So the dictator wants to project power. So that means submission of the people there too. So there, not only the military and politicians are attacked, but mostly civilians. The purpose is to bomb them into submission. That's the goal. In this worldview, people have no independent rights, but are subjects of the state. So that's quite an important distinction from democracies. Hence, Putin didn't accept the Eastern European countries' decision to join NATO instead of joining Russia, because he saw them as his property. It seems to me that this is what is happening in Ukraine now. And This is also what he actually said himself in his speech. So the importance of conquering countries for the power of a dictator is also shown by Putin's speech just before the war against Ukraine. There he justifies and denounces his actions with his view of history. So you can see the links here, a translation into German for reading here in English, and also in English directly from the Kremlin. So I actually like to judge things by listening to the speeches of people directly, and in this case, a direct translation. So there he basically also said that he sees those Eastern European countries as his property, more or less. So as a contrast, power dynamics of democracies. There the leader, the elected leader, knows that he has the majority of the people behind him, and that makes a big difference. The only way to increase power in a democracy is to obtain more votes. This can be done by convincing the voters. So you can convince them that you're a good leader, and then you get more votes. And the convincing works better if the people are educated, if they actually understand you. This is why you see highly developed educational systems in democracies. The leaders in democracies also have no incentive to conquer other countries because there are no voters, right? They don't vote for him. The only purpose democracies have for the military is to deter dictatorships to attack them. If they're attacked, their military already failed. So because it's for deterrence. In this case, the military of a democracy is used as a punishment to prevent further attacks. Hence, they will take away any benefit the attacker might have gained, plus some more from those who benefited from the attack, like politicians or the army, and then leave again. So it's a different power dynamics. Okay, so now back to renewable energy, or first fossil energy, in this case, natural gas imports of Germany. So that's the main problem in Germany right now, the lack of gas and too much reliance on Russian gas. So Germany's natural gas imports from Russia can be seen here in this link. And there you can find that in 2020, its total natural gas imports were 80,000 million cubic meter in total. And from Russia, we had 52 million cubic meter, which is 65%. So more than half of Germany's gas imports were from Russia, and that's the problem. Then when we take a look at Germany's electricity mix, and we can see how much gas is in there, you can find it here in this link. You can see that the total electric energy was 490 terawatt hours in 2021. 23% of those was from wind energy, so already quite substantial. 9.9% from solar energy, and 10.5% natural gas, or 51.1 terawatt hours. So it's actually not too high. It's just 10% of the total electricity in Germany was from natural gas. And when you look at the numbers for wind and solar, you can compute that 32% more wind and solar energy could replace the natural gas completely. So for the electricity. And also when you look at the fluctuations between 2020 and 2019, the fluctuations were already between 503 and 553 terawatt hours per year. Hence, about by these 50 terawatt hours. So here we can see that the 50 terawatt hours is about the same as what comes from gas. So it's actually, if you would just turn off the gas, it would look like a normal fluctuation. So it's actually not that bad for electricity. So the problem for gas is more for the other purposes, not particular for electricity. Yeah. So you can also read this in this link here. Yeah, so hence the missing gas for electricity generation corresponds to normal yearly fluctuations. Also an important point is the power reserves of Germany's electricity network, which we can see from this link, energycharts.info. There on this webpage, we can click on the tab Power and then Electricity Production, and then select the interval to a year, and then look at the extreme values. So there we can see the load, the consumed energy, was a minimum of 32,800 megawatts, or a maximum of 78,800 megawatts, which is 78.8 gigawatts. So that means the maximum power consumption 2022 in Germany was 78.8 gigawatts. So now we can click also on this web page on this power tab and then installed power. And we can see the total sum is 221 gigawatts. So that's actually a multitude. So that's actually quite a lot here, quite a big margin. So even if we subtract the gas, like total gas and also total nuclear power, then what's left is 185 gigawatts. So still a multitude of 78. So quite a large margin. But the installed maximum of wind and solar power cannot be achieved in winter. So we can actually check it out, how much we get in, for instance, January, which is the low point for solar. So then we click on Power, Electricity Production, same webpage, select interval month, and select January. And then we look at the minimum and maximum for wind, onshore and offshore, and also solar, and take the median as most likely. Right? We have the fluctuation, and we just take the median as the most likely value. And then we get to 24.28 gigawatts. And the median solar power is 5.9, and the median together is 30 gigawatts. So 30 gigawatts for January. And we compare that for the installed maximum for wind and solar, and that's 128 gigawatts. So basically we have a renewable power loss in January of 97.8 gigawatts. So now we can also subtract this 97.8 gigawatts from this margin, 185 minus 97, and we get to 97.2 gigawatts power for January. And that's still more than the peak power demand of 78 gigawatts. So we still have a reserve or margin of 8.4 gigawatts. And that's still plenty, because as a comparison, 1 gigawatt roughly corresponds to the power of one nuclear power plant. So quite a lot. And hence the reserve, even for January, corresponds to roughly 8 nuclear power plants. And that's just for Germany, with even neglecting that we have a European power grid. And this is also without even using the natural gas from storage tanks for electricity generation, which could still be kept and used for peak cases. So there is still a reserve there. Then we can take a look at the natural gas amount for electricity generation. So how much of the gas do we actually need for electricity? So here we can do a few calculations because I couldn't find a direct number. So basically I had to calculate back from the amount of electricity to the necessary amount of gas for it. So we know the amount of electricity. That's this 51.1 terawatt hours that we have in our electric grid last year. So this is what we need to replace. So then we can take a look at the natural gas energy density. So this is a number which we can find here in this Wikipedia link. Then we need more energy for gas than the electricity which is produced because of this efficiency of power plants, which is roughly 30%. So only 30% of the gas energy is actually converted to electricity. So that means we need a good 3 times more gas energy than electric energy that we get. So using this calculation, we find, and I'm using this little Python code here using SymPy. So if you're Python and programming fans, this would be for you. It's also quite useful because here you can actually use symbolic units and calculate with units, which is quite useful for checking the result if it has the right unit. And we get here this result, 16,864 million cubic meter of gas, which we need. And then we can compare it with the total from Russia, which is 52,464 million cubic meter, which we saw above. And that comes to about 1/3 or 32% of the total from Russian gas is used for electricity production. So if you don't do the electricity production from gas, we save about 1/3 of the gas. And we can also see here that 2/3 is going to different purposes, for instance, heating or industry. Yeah, and then when we take a look at where gas power plants are actually most used, they are used as peaker plants, which means they are used when there's a very high demand and there needs to be a quick supply of energy. So they are usually not run all the time, but what's used here is the property of gas power plants that they can be turned on very quickly and also turned off very quickly. Right? That's unlike coal or oil, which takes a long time to ramp up and also takes a long time to cool down. So that's the main purpose. So the main purpose is actually more like buffering. So it's not like a constant load, but more like buffering peak demands. And this is also something that can be easily done by battery storage. So since sometimes we now have grid scale battery storage, and so that means we can replace those peaker plants, the gas power plants, in a good part by grid battery storage. For instance, like the Tesla Megapack, which you can see here in this link. So let me go to this one here. Yeah, so here you can see how this Tesla Megapack looks like. So it's basically a big collection of rechargeable batteries at a grid scale. So here you can see also the data. Each unit, which means each of those little blocks here, has 3 megawatt hours, and there's already over 5 gigawatt hours deployed. So these are really numbers which are significant for grid storage. Yeah, so there's also this, so they are charged when there's a surplus of renewable energy, for instance. And this energy is released when there's the peak in demand, or also when there's a peak in supply, when the sun is shining and there's a lot of wind. So far, often wind turbines, wind generators are just shut down if the grid cannot take it. So having batteries allows us to store this energy for times of more demand. Yeah, here's also a link to the Fraunhofer Institute here, which also show how the batteries in the grid are working. So here you can see a nice diagram. So what we just saw is this application here. So we have this battery farm connected directly to the power grid. Right, so this is the replacement of the peaker plant, basically. Then we can also use them nearby wind generators to basically store energy from high wind situations where the energy is not exactly needed in the rest of the grid. So this basically then buffers high supply. Similar for solar. So if we have a very sunny day around noon when maybe there's not so much electricity demand, we can store it here in the batteries. And we can even take electric cars when they are parked, for instance, during the day when the cars are parked at the company where people work. They can also can be used as grid storage to buffer changes in demand and supply. Here's an example where batteries are used for neighborhoods of homes. So this is like a local grid. So they also allow it to have a more decentralized power structure by buffering demand and supply. So it's actually quite practical. Yeah, so there are also examples for natural gas peaker power plant replacements. For instance, in the US, I found here this link, which describes the plans for replacement. So basically, you can take the building of a gas power plant, take the gas turbines out, and just replace everything inside with batteries. That's very practical because the power lines are already there. Here's an example from California, the so-called Moss Landing power plant. Here in this link, it's described, and it also says energy storage is actually the true bridge to a clean energy future. So here we have actually, using those batteries, we have solved the problem of the fluctuations of the renewable energy. Batteries allow us to store the energy as it comes and then release it as it is needed. And it even turns out that these battery replacements are 30% cheaper than the gas power plants. So if we need a new peaker plant, then it's actually better to plan batteries right away. Yeah, and renewable energy, even in the past, was already among the cheapest energy. You can see more about it in my climate change calculated number 4, which you can find again here in this repository. And now renewable energy is much cheaper than fossil energy like natural gas. And hence it would also be useful if energy prices would reflect this difference in prices, right? So the energy prices should differ according to the source instead of being coupled. Right now, it's electricity has the same price no matter where it comes from, and it's basically determined by the most expensive version, in this case, gas. So that's kind of unfair to the renewable energies because they are much cheaper to produce. So that's something that new laws can solve, basically. So for instance, the electricity tariff for renewables could be much cheaper. So we already have different electricity tariffs in Germany for conventional electricity and renewable. So far, renewable was slightly more expensive, but now it's the opposite. Renewable is much cheaper than conventional, and that should also be reflected in those tariffs, which would be a solution for the very high energy prices that we see now. Yeah, so also the European power network is an important piece here in energy safety. So we already have the European electric power network. Often people don't know it because there's so much talk about the German network or country-wide networks, but actually all over the world, we usually have continental power networks, which are very important for leveling out demand and supply already without having too many batteries. So we can see this here is the German Wikipedia page, and this is the English one about the grid of continental Europe. So here you can see we have Europe, and much of Europe is part of this power grid. And similar all over the world, you have large-scale power grids for this purpose of leveling out fluctuations. So that also means if one country has a shortage, it can still get electricity from another country. So renewable energy should be seen as a chance here. So renewable energy gives us energy independence, which is also important in times of increased political instability and unrest in the world as consequence of climate change. We already have the necessary technology, we just need the political will to deploy. See my previous video, Climate Change Calculator number 5. And we already have enough space for it. So for wind power, we just need about 2 to 3% of the agricultural area in Germany. For solar, we need the suitable roof space on buildings and some space in no longer used coal mining or lignite open pit mining. So the space is already there, it just needs to be used. And renewable energy is much cheaper and much faster to deploy than, for instance, nuclear power. Nuclear power plants needs decades to plan and build, whereas a wind power generator, here an example, for instance, a 4.5 megawatt wind power generator can be built in just 3 weeks. So there, the longest time is again the planning and the approvals, but the building process is actually quite quick. I found this link actually doesn't really work anymore. The newspaper doesn't have it anymore. So most time-consuming are political rules and regulations. And the idea here, there could be a temporary wind power generators to speed up the approval process. Right, so since they're built so quickly and also since it's not very costly to remove it, they could also be put up temporarily with a temporary approval, which would be useful in the current time where there's a quick demand for more energy. So in conclusions, fossil fuel reserves promote autocratic and dictatorial developments. This also makes it dangerous to rely on them. This is on top of global warming caused by the rapid increase of CO2 emissions of the world. And renewable energy is already available to quickly replace fossil fuels, as I showed in previous episodes. Natural gas power plants can be quickly replaced by wind and solar energy, grid battery storage, and also a smart grid, which would help. It just needs a political support and push to allow and foster such projects, and hence suitable laws and regulations need to be adapted and made. And that should be it for today. Thank you for your attention, and then see you next time.